Hi, everybody. Thank you all for joining us tonight on this webinar about the Desert National Wildlife Refuge. We've got a great lineup of people to share their thoughts on why this area in Southern Nevada is so important and why it's imminently threatened by the Air Force. We're going to talk to you about what you can do. I'm Shaaron Netherton, and I'll be your moderator tonight. I've been the executive director of Friends of Nevada Wilderness for the past 20 years. Friends has been a huge champion of wild places in the Desert National Wildlife Refuge since the 1970s, and we've been one of the leaders in the fight to save the refuge from military expansion through our Don't Bomb the Bighorn campaign. Over the past several years, as a military takeover threat grew, more and more folks came together working to save the Desert Refuge. Indigenous people, the Nevada Congressional Delegation, the state legislature, other local elected officials, conservation groups across the country, the sporting community, veterans, and many, many other voices. The coalition grew as the threat to the refuge intensified. I want to thank our co-sponsors for tonight's webinar, the National Wildlife Refuge Association, Defenders of Wildlife, the Veterans for Peace, Nevada Wildlife Federation, the Siera Club, the Wilderness Society, and Nuwu Art. Thank you all for joining us tonight to learn more about the Desert Refuge and how you can help make a difference. To set the stage this evening, we're going to start with a couple minutes of a video from Backcountry Pictures. They put this together to help fight the campaign to protect the refuge. And so here is Don't Bomb the Bighorn video.
I like to call the deserts rainforests without rain, just to convey the incredible richness and diversity of the things that live here.
I see a land brimming with life, and one that rivals or exceeds the amount of productivity in a tropical rainforest.
I just feel an obligation to these life forms that are on the planet with me, that they should have a place where they can have their life cycles without humans interfering.
This is our Paiute ancestral land. This is a place where they made their stories, where they left their stories.
Got the white culture on there.
Once the Air Force gets control of the area, people will never get it back.
Most people value Yosemite. What would you feel if Yosemite was taken?
To not be able to come here anymore would be a real loss to the American people.
To see any part of this cut off from us would be a tragedy.
Just because it doesn't have trees and lakes doesn't mean it deserves to be bombed.
All right, I'd like to now welcome our first guest, Carolyn Brouwer. She's the Vice President of Government Affairs for the National Wildlife Refuge Association, where she works on federal conservation policies in Congress, focusing on federal funding and legislation affecting the National Wildlife Refuge system. So Carolyn's going to take it away and give you some more detail about the refuge, some of the history, and just to round out your knowledge of the Desert Refuge. Carolyn, take it away.
Great, thank you, Shaaron. I am thrilled to be here tonight to talk to everybody about the National Wildlife Refuge system and particularly the Desert National Wildlife Refuge. So there's just a very quick agenda of what I'm going to be talking about tonight. First, it's going to be the National Wildlife Refuge system overall, and then a brief history of the Desert National Wildlife Refuge. And then I want to go through the 4 proposed legislative options that are on the table for the Desert Refuge. Next slide, please. So first of all, the National Wildlife Refuge System is as a whole, it is made up of 850 million acres of public lands set aside as wildlife habitat. These lands put together make up the largest system of public lands for wildlife in the entire world. If the refuge system were a country, it would be the 5th largest in the world. It is about the size of India. So there are 850 million acres of land and water. 750 million of these acres are in 5 marine national monuments. 4 are in the Pacific Ocean and 1 is in the Atlantic Ocean. This map is not to scale. These areas are enormous. There are also 100 million acres of land. 80 million of those are in Alaska and 20 million of those are in the lower 48 states. Out of those 20 million, 1.6 are in the Desert National Wildlife Refuge in southern Nevada, and that is 8% of the refuge system in the lower 48 states. There are a number of compatible uses. Sorry, go back one more. There are a number of compatible uses on the refuge system. There are 6 wildlife uses that go beyond just preserving the area for wildlife. And those are photography, wildlife watching, hunting, fishing, environmental education, and interpretation. Those are the 6 uses of the refuge system. There is not a use of the refuge system that includes military purposes. Next slide, please. So this is a map of what was in existence on the area around the Desert National Wildlife Refuge before the refuge became a refuge. Well before it became a refuge, the land in southern Nevada was the ancestral land of the Southern Paiutes. You can see on this map in the top left corner is the Desert National Wildlife Refuge, or part of the National Wildlife Refuge. The size of the Moapa Paiute Reservation changed dramatically over time, but there are many, many locations on the Desert Refuge that contain sacred sites for the Southern Paiute. Fawn Douglas, who is an enrolled member of the Las Vegas Paiute tribe, is featured in a video that we'll see next, and she's also speaking tonight. So I'm going to let her tell her own story, but I did not want to leave out the fact that the Desert Refuge has been an important site for tribes for centuries. And out of the 4 proposals that I'll talk about in a few minutes, the only way that these sites are going to be protected is if the refuge is protected. Next slide. So just a very brief history of the Desert Refuge. It was created in 1936 as habitat for the desert bighorn sheep. That is the purpose of the refuge, to conserve that species. There are 6 mountain ranges included in the refuge, and those mountain ranges are as high as 10,000 feet. And as you can probably tell by the name of the refuge and by the video that we just saw, the land is very arid and there's very little rain there. In the 1940s, the Air Force expanded the nearby Nevada Test and Training Range into the Desert National Wildlife Refuge. And since then, there have been a series of 20-year in length withdrawals that have slowly eaten away at the refuge. Every time one of these withdrawals comes up, the military has taken more and more land away from the Desert Refuge. The current withdrawal is going to expire this year, and that renewal is going to go through the National Defense Authorization Act. The NDAA is a bill that's passed every year to fund military programs and military priorities, and this withdrawal is included in that bill. And as I showed on the agenda slide, there are 4 proposals for which lands and jurisdictions should be included in this year's NDAA. So let's go to it. Next slide. All right, the first proposal is, I call this the status quo proposal. So this is what is currently happening on the refuge. And all of the conservation groups that are participating in this webinar are all supportive of keeping this status quo as the option for the next 20 years. So what is happening here? So what we have in the red outline is the Nevada Test and Training Range. What is in the green area is the Desert National Wildlife Refuge. And you can see that there is an overlay over here. So the green hash marks, that is the area that is considered the joint use area. That's 850,000 acres. 738,000 of that, everything in the green is 738,000 acres, and that is under Fish and Wildlife Service primary jurisdiction. The Air Force has secondary jurisdiction on those areas. The dark gray, those 4 splotches in the middle, those are in valleys between mountain ranges. And those areas is 112,000 acres. And those areas are Air Force primary jurisdiction. Fish and Wildlife Service has secondary jurisdiction on those areas. The Air Force on that 112,000 acres, for the past 20 years that they've had that area, they have bombed it. They have contaminants on the land. They have built landing strips. They do ground maneuvers. And what we're seeing in those areas with all of this development is the sheep that are in the mountain ranges on either side of those valleys, the sheep are not migrating between the mountain ranges. And if this continues for too much longer, we're going to have a lack of genetic diversity in these sheep. The area that is completely Fish and Wildlife Service sole jurisdiction is the area to the east of that bold red line on the right side of the screen, where you can see the sheep range and the Las Vegas range. So that is what's currently on the refuge right now. So proposal number 2, next slide. This is what the Air Force has proposed. They want to take the green and pink hash marks, which is the current joint use area, and they want to expand it into those red areas as well. That total acreage is 1.1 million acres. And not only do they want to do that and expand it to 1.1 million acres, they also want primary jurisdiction over the entirety of that area. And what that would mean is that all of this area, some of which, actually the majority of which is proposed wilderness, and it is currently being managed as wilderness, would then be open to anything that the Air Force wanted to do. They could do anything they wanted on this land. They could bomb it, they could build infrastructure, they could land planes, they could do anything they wanted. And another thing that I would also want to mention on this is straight through the refuge, you can see the Alamo Road. Currently, the Alamo Road is open to the public. It goes from the visitor center in the south all the way up to the Repenhegen National Wildlife Refuge in the northern part of which is just north of the Desert Refuge. So that road under this proposal would be closed to the public. It is the only through road that goes through the refuge, and it would be closed to the public. Next slide. So this is the third proposal, and this is what the Nevada delegation has proposed. So Senator Cortez Masto has been leading this effort, and what the Nevada delegation came up with is they would expand the refuge slightly, not the 300,000 acres, but they would expand it by 50,000 acres. And what that expansion does is it brings that line of demarcation between the joint use area on the western side and the sole jurisdiction area of the Fish and Wildlife Service on the right side. It brings that line to the Alamo Road. It would also create congressionally designated wilderness in all of those areas that you can see there. The designated wilderness would be 1.3 million acres, but it would expand the joint use area slightly. In this scenario, there is no jurisdictional changes. Everything that is currently Fish and Wildlife Service, the only change is those 50,000 acres. Everything west of the Alamo Road would be primary Fish and Wildlife Service, secondary Air Force. To the east would be sole jurisdiction Fish and Wildlife Service, with the exception of those 112,000 acres that I talked about earlier that finger through the western part of the refuge. So next. So before I get to the last slide, which is proposal number 4, I want to talk about how this came about, this fourth proposal, which we were not expecting to have happen. We thought the first 3 proposals were it. The Senate Armed Services Committee, which runs the NDAA out of committee, they proposed status quo. We thought that the Senate was going to be our biggest hurdle for the Desert Refuge coming out of committee. And it was not. They passed a status quo bill, which was great. We were extremely happy to have that come out. Then the House Armed Services marked up their full committee bill, where all of the members that are on the House Armed Services Committee get together and they have amendments and they talk about what's going to be the final bill that they send to the House floor. That bill was introduced with the status quo language, but during that full committee markup on July 1st, a little over a week ago, Representative Rob Bishop, who is from Utah, introduced an amendment that was accepted and passed by voice vote out of that full committee. So next slide, I'll talk about what was in that amendment. So this is the proposal number 4, which is brand new. And Defenders of Wildlife mocked up this map. So thank you very much for doing that. So what you can see is that in the hash marks, what should look familiar, that is the current joint use area. What this amendment did was it changed the jurisdiction in the joint use area. Instead of it being primary Fish and Wildlife Service, well, most of it, primary Fish and Wildlife Service, secondary Air Force, it changed the entire jurisdiction of that hash mark area to co-management. And I use the word co-management in quotation marks because it's not really co-management. It's all co-management on paper, but any disputes that come between the Air Force and the Fish and Wildlife Service would be settled in the favor of the Air Force automatically. So it is essentially primary jurisdiction for the Air Force. So this entire area is just slightly less than what the Air Force proposal was. It just doesn't have that extra 300,000 acre expansion, but it is everything that the Air Force wanted practically. So the bill also slightly, it gave more expansion access for tribes, hunters, people who wanted to go hiking, and for the Fish and Wildlife Service, because that has been a problem that has happened over the last 20 years. It slightly expanded access to the closed joint use area. However, if there are no restrictions on what the Air Force can do on that area, there's no habitat quality that people are going to be able to use or that sheep will be able to use, and that Fish and Wildlife Service would have to manage if this proposal became law. So those are the options on the table, and I will pass it back to Shaaron.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. That was great. It's a very, very complex issue. And the groups that are involved on this webinar have really been working hard. I just want you to know that we meet weekly, we strategize on the politics and what's going on, and we coordinate, and we are doing our best to really help protect the refuge and work amongst everybody. So you being here tonight is really important for you to learn more about this really complex issue. But the bottom line is we want to save this refuge. It's worth it. So before we call the next panelist in person, we're going to see another little clip of the video by Backcountry Pictures. And this features Fawn Douglas. Fawn is an Indigenous American artist and activist. She's a member of the Las Vegas Paiute tribe. And right after this video clip, we're going to welcome Fawn in person.
Petroglyphs for the past 200 years are definitely Paiute. So I know this is a place of our people. I know that this is my ancestors' area. I know this. And it's written. It's right here. I definitely feel a connection. I know that these are rock writings, that these are stories. It's not rock art. I mean, what I do is rock art. It's art that's inspired by these stories. This is a place where our ancestors walked. So many, many, many moons ago, our people weren't doing well. They were hungry, starving, and the bighorn sheep saw us and sacrificed itself, eat from me, take from me. And so our people were able to survive by this heroic act of the bighorn sheep. We call the bighorn sheep our brother. That is us. We are them, and we must protect them. I'm an artist, activist, and I'm very much inspired by these areas. I don't know everything about everything just because I'm Paiute. It's a daily learning something new kind of thing. The only difference now that I'm older is I'm listening. I'm listening more, and I'm more interested in, these stories and trying to figure out who I am, because this is a part of our identity. We identify by the lands from which we came. I touch the sand and I feel like I'm at home. I feel good. I feel welcome.
That was great. Fawn is an amazing artist, and we're so fortunate that she was able to join us tonight. So Fawn, welcome. I would love to have you tell us a little bit about the Southern Paiute connection to these lands that are now the Desert Refuge, and have the local tribes made any moves towards protection for these lands?
Thank you so much for asking that, Shaaron. I was going to talk about the history. I'm really glad that the video showed that, because we're in our summer time where we don't tell these stories. But the Moapa Paiute tribe drafted a resolution number M180307 in opposition of the expansion of the Nevada Test and Training Range into the Desert National Wildlife Refuge. And this is back in March 12, 2018. And the Las Vegas Paiute tribe also followed with the resolution, and both of these were unanimous. Back in March 11, 2019, resolution number 19-005. And it rejected the expansion of the U.S. Air Force for its use of land use or exercise jurisdiction within the Desert National Wildlife Refuge. And the Southern Paiute people have gotten together and talked about, why these places are important and why they deserve protection. I think it's really best, and also to note that I am not the voice of the tribe, our elected officials are, but our elected officials of the Las Vegas Paiute tribe drafted their own statement that really needs to be revisited as we start to educate on why the Desert Refuge is so important. So within their statement, they opposed the U.S. Air Force expansion of the Nevada Test and Training Range into the refuge. And in commenting, please note that the Las Vegas Paiute tribe ancestors for close to a millennium have lived, traveled, hunted, worshipped, and otherwise used the land which the Air Force now wants to use for flight training, munitions testing, and simulated ground combat. The Las Vegas Paiute tribe is deeply concerned about these proposed uses of the land. As you can appreciate, Western expansion by Europeans and others greatly reduced the ability of the Southern Paiutes to use the expansive lands they considered their homeland. The creation of reservations reduced even more the tribe's ability to use the land for travel and food. The Las Vegas Paiute tribe's initial reservation was created and what is now close to downtown Las Vegas, and the acreage taken into trust for the tribe in 1983 lies in the Las Vegas Valley, with no tribal rights to the mountains they so often used for sustenance and respite from the brutal Las Vegas summers. The Las Vegas Paiute tribe considers the Southern Nevada mountains as sacred. Tribal members stay connected to their culture, religion, and sense of who they are, who we are, by accessing public lands outside of their existing reservation. Reduction of that access through the Air Force's proposed use greatly affects these sacred landscapes. Already, the tribe's quiet enjoyment of its land is affected by flyovers and munitions training. This is especially true during the red flag training that occurs annually. During these flyovers and trainings, tribal members are subjected to constant loud noise and disturbance. The tribe fears that increasing the already existing impacts will damage the tribe further. Additionally, the Air Force's preferred alternative for the Nevada Test and Training Range, if approved by Congress, would eliminate wilderness protections from nearly 1 million acres of land within the Desert National Wildlife Refuge, which would increase the threats of the survival of the desert bighorn sheep, the desert tortoise, and other imperiled wildlife. These areas of historical, cultural, spiritual, recreational significance are not only to Las Vegas Paiute tribe, but other tribes that regard this area as culturally significant. In addition, this expansion would degrade the ability of future Congresses to exercise meaningful oversight of the Air Force's discharge of its environmental responsibilities within the refuge. Further, the additional acres that the United States Air Force proposes includes portions of the sheep range, which the Nevada Department of Wildlife describes as the heart of the Desert National Wildlife Refuge, whose importance to wildlife resources and public access cannot be overstated. The Nevada Department of Wildlife states that the Desert National Wildlife Refuge protects irreplaceable habitat for one of the largest populations of the desert bighorn sheep in Nevada. The expansion would also reduce their seasonal migration routes that are dependent upon cross-valley movements from one mountain range to another. Other wildlife that will be impacted include 320 bird species, including the golden eagle, roadrunner, and the pygmy owl, 53 mammal species, including the desert bighorn sheep and kit fox, 35 reptile species, including the desert tortoise and 4 amphibian species, and nearly 500 plant species. Accordingly, the Las Vegas Paiute tribe rejects any proposal by the United States Air Force to expand its use of land or exercise of jurisdiction within the Desert National Wildlife Refuge beyond that which it currently possesses, and to limit any proposal to extend the Air Force's authority over the Nevada Test and Training Range to no more than 20 years. And these are the words of the Las Vegas Paiute tribe as voted on by unanimous votes by the Tribal Council and entrusted to me to deliver. And I was entrusted to deliver this a couple years ago, but the facts are the same. Our people have been here since time immemorial, and we will continue to protect the refuge and educate where we can. And I thank you for taking the time to listen to the words of the Las Vegas Paiute tribe and to also continue working with us.
Thank you so much, Fawn. I appreciate all of that information and the heartfelt words that came from the Las Vegas Paiutes. And your connection to the land is so, so important, and it comes out in your words and your art. So thank you very, very much.
Okay, thank you.
Our next speaker tonight is going to be Curt Chaffin, and Curt is the works on government relations team at Defenders of Wildlife, a national organization dedicated to the protection of all native animals and plants in their natural communities. Curt specializes in wildlife refuge defense and advocacy, among other things, and this refuge needs defense. So Curt, tell us about it. We wanted to know, what kind of management activities are being done on the refuge to benefit important wildlife species like the bighorn sheep that Fawn was just talking about, and desert tortoise and other critters out there?
Yeah, thanks, Shaaron. And I guess before getting started answering that, thanks so much to you guys and friends, obviously to Fawn and our friends within the tribe. I do work, pretty exclusively on refuges all across the country, and it's hard to say that I've seen a more special one than Desert. And as I maneuver on Capitol Hill and talking with agencies, being able to work with friends and other folks on the ground is just invaluable and provide such a service and so much help to me in my job. So thank you for that. I think it doesn't come to any surprise to anyone on this webinar how special the wildlife is at Desert Refuge. And Fawn probably said it better than I could. I mean, these are iconic species like bighorn sheep, like desert tortoise, and they're incredibly important to us as a country and incredibly important for wildlife conservation, but also have a very human element and component. And I really appreciate Fawn showing that so well because we definitely agree. As Carolyn mentioned in the genesis of the refuge, the connection to bighorn sheep and to species like desert tortoise or golden eagles, it's so central to what these lands were preserved for. I think Carolyn may have mentioned the 1966 Act, and really going back even earlier than that, but the refuge really was created for the protection, the enhancement, the maintenance of the bighorn sheep population. The Comprehensive Conservation Plan, or CCP, which I'm sure a lot of folks on this call have participated in the past. The first stated priority is that it's restoration of the bighorn sheep populations. And legally speaking and administratively speaking, that commitment, that duty does extend to the flora and fauna of desert. the overall biodiversity is really something to behold. And the stated duty of the Fish and Wildlife Service is to maintain that biodiversity. And, as a lot of the videos that we've seen have showed, for good reason, because there's really not much like it anywhere else. But to get a little bit concrete about what's actually happening there on the refuge, Fish and Wildlife Service, partners at the state level, the local level, the tribal level, really do so much to help manage and support these important populations, things from improving natural systems, managing water guzzlers to ensure adequate water supply, doing surveys, conducting aerial surveys and installing cameras. Carolyn mentioned the tremendous damage that's really caused in the joint use area by bombing and by military action. And so being able to mitigate those harms is crucial when you consider the threats to migration and movement. But overall, it is just that watchful eye to manage, to research, to monitor what these populations are looking like, what the trends are, so specific, project level actions can be taken when needed. I do think that all of this hits at a larger point that while Fish and Wildlife Service is doing a lot of great things on the ground, their access is severely limited, as has been discussed already. I mean, it's really just days out of the year, on weekends, holidays, that kind of things. It's far less access than they need, far fewer days than they need for proper management, and definitely for the type of management that these species deserve. We are all intent in our coalition on improving that access, helping the service and partners get the necessary improvements needed. And it really underscores the threat of the proposal that Caroline mentioned, the one that we are really facing right now, that number 4 option, that if that control, that jurisdiction that Fish and Wildlife Service has right now, if that's turned on its head and gone to the Air Force, then it will really endanger the lands and really endanger the species like bighorn sheep, like desert tortoise. The last thing I'll say is I think you might have seen the map that Carolyn alluded to, that the defenders worked, and really thanks to our science folks for mapping that up. But it proves what we all know, that these areas are strongholds for these iconic species, and we must do what we can to protect them. So thanks for letting me talk about wildlife. It's my favorite thing to do. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Curt. That was awesome. Friends of Nevada Wilderness, we have volunteers that go out on the refuge, as do many, many other groups. But one of our favorite things is our alternative spring break, where we take college kids from the local university and colleges in Southern Nevada, take them out for a week during spring break, where they get to do projects on the ground. And folks from the refuge come and talk to them about the importance of it. They learn a little bit about the cultural resources. So these areas are important in so many ways and for so many people. So on that note, we're going to change gears now, and I am really pleased to welcome our next guest, Garett Repenhegen. And Garett is the Executive Director for Veterans for Peace. He's the son of a Vietnam veteran and a grandson of 2 World War II veterans. He served in the U.S. Army as a cavalry scout sniper in the 1st Infantry Division. Garett completed a deployment in Kosovo on a 9-month peacekeeping mission and a combat tour in Iraq. Garett gained an honorable discharge in May of 2005 and began working as a veterans advocate and a dedicated activist. And we are so thrilled to be working with Veterans for Peace. Garett, welcome. Can you talk a little bit from your experience about, what does the military prioritize on bases?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. It's an honor to be part of this panel, these incredible speakers. that know a lot more than I do about this issue. The one thing I do know about is the military. Being a sniper in the U.S. Army was quite an experience. And I certainly learned a lot about ranges. I spent a lot of time on a range to become a U.S. Army sniper. And, you know, when we're talking about ranges, we're talking about using weapons. And, you know, if you're familiar, if you have family members, if you're a veteran, when we deploy to places like Iraq and Afghanistan, often we use the term we're going down range. And that's because you're basically putting yourself where the bullets are going. And that's what will happen in this area in the NTTR if they expand the range. That's where bullets and bombs will be going. You know, there'll be flight testing. There'll be the possibility of building structures, building new roads. To get targets in and out, they'll have to use vehicles. Sometimes they'll use simulated warfare on this land, which will mean tracked vehicles and boots on the ground. And it'll basically destroy the wildlife habitat. It'll destroy the cryptobiotic soil that you know will take centuries to come back, and it'll destroy the wilderness quality of this land. And you know that's the military's intention with this location, or else they wouldn't call it a range. You know, I can say that you know, you could probably see the hypocrisy around being someone who is supposedly defending the lands of the free. And there you have our public lands, which is probably the most iconic symbolic form of free lands for the American people. No matter who you are, you're able to access this land and use this land and recreate in it. And, you know, I've taken a lot of veterans out into the wilderness into our public lands to heal from post-traumatic stress disorder. It's amazing to see the transformation almost instantly from the point when you lose sight of your vehicle. You know, multi-tour Marine Corps veterans almost transform back into 12-year-old children, jumping over streams and, you know, picking up sticks. And the healing is really, you could really see it manifest. And in a wilderness area, when you encounter wildlife, I think it accelerates that amount of wilderness submersion so fast. Those actual wildlife encounters, and you know, having wild areas where animals can live as they would in their natural habitat, unmolested by people, I think is so important. And as a military veteran, I believe that there should be areas in this country still that remain protected for our wildlife and can be truly wild. And you know, I hope that we don't make this another hypocrisy where we're destroying our public lands in the place of national defense, because what is it that we're defending if we're destroying our commons and the place where we pray and we recreate and we bond?
Thank you, Garrett. That, you know, it's such a wonderful image for me to think about veterans who have been through so much, being able to come to the Desert Refuge and actually find refuge. That's really a nice thought. And with that, I'm going to welcome my next guest, Russell Kuhlman. And Russell is the Executive Director for the Nevada Wildlife Federation. He's a longtime hunter, passionate about improving habitat for wildlife and increasing access to public lands. And Russell, welcome. I wanted to ask if you could talk a little bit about why the sporting community should be involved with the issue of protecting this desert refuge.
Absolutely. You know, thanks for that question and having the Nevada Wildlife Federation on. My advance apologies. My audio seems to be cutting out every minute or so. So if I go quiet, my apologies. But as hunters, we are active participants on the landscape and have a responsibility to care for the wildlife and the habitat they live in. The sporting community has volunteered countless hours, blood, sweat to ensure that bighorn sheep in the Desert National Wildlife Refuge have the habitat and water sources necessary, not only to survive, but flourish, really, because that's what we want to see. We don't want to see the sheep just barely making status quo. We want to make sure that there's abundance of them. And I think majority of hunters and volunteers that hike out into the desert to create or repair a water development site will never get the opportunity to pursue a sheep during hunting season, just because the opportunity is so rare to actually draw a permit in order to pursue them. But I feel that providing better habitat and possibly putting more sheep on the mountain for future generations is all the reward that those volunteers need. The desert sheep across their entire geographic range are facing a number of threats. Those threats include climate change, disease, habitat fragmentation, human development, and the list goes on for sure. And adding the additional hurdle of losing or having reduced access for volunteers to improve or create those water sources for sheep should absolutely not be added to that long list of threats that are currently there, that those sheep are having to face every day. I just finished a biography about Theodore Roosevelt when he was in his presidency, and he is arguably our greatest conservation president, who was also an avid hunter himself, and ironically the creator of the National Wildlife System. And for those that don't know, Franklin Roosevelt was the one who signed the order to create the Desert National Wildlife Refuge System. So I say it all the time, but the conservation community is a very small world, and that's a fact for that. But anyway, his Theodore Roosevelt's quote was, "In a civilized and cultivated country, wild animals only continue to exist at all when preserved by sportsmen." And he goes on to say that genuine sportsman is by all odds the most important factor in keeping the larger and more valuable wild creatures from total extermination. And I think that the modern sporting community has an outstanding track record on bringing back animal species that were rapidly declining throughout our country shortly after the turn of the 20th century. Animals like the white-tailed deer, elk, antelope, waterfowl, and even the wild turkey, they were all heading towards extinction in the last century. Interesting enough, example, just even 50 years ago, there was only an estimated 12,000 antelope in North America. And with the support and effort by hunters, today there's over 1 million that roam the landscape. And it's said that there's more antelope in Wyoming than people. And I truly feel, as a 21st century hunter, the animal that we're responsible for adding to that recovery list is the wild sheep, obviously specifically maybe the desert wild sheep. And as of right now, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Air Force co-manage more than 850,000 acres of the 1.6 million acre refuge. And with the amendment that was talked about earlier, that was introduced by Representative Bishop, the Air Force would have essentially primary jurisdiction, or at least final say, on how those 850,000 acres are managed. And looking at the Air Force's mission statement here, it says their mission is to fly, fight, and win in air, space, and cyberspace. And when I go over to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's website, they state that their mission is to work with others to conserve, protect, enhance fish, wildlife, plants, and their habitats for the continuing benefit of the American people. At least for me, it's clear what government agencies should be given the responsibility in managing the Desert National Wildlife Refuge. So thanks again, and hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you, Russell. I think that was really good. I know that the sportsman community have done a lot of work on the Desert Refuge. They have a lot of volunteers. And so it's great to be working together with so many people from so many different backgrounds on this. A lot of people care deeply about the Desert Refuge, want to see it protected, and we're all on the same side here. Regardless. So it's very nice. This is not a partisan issue. It's about protecting an incredible, very, very important place. So we're going to change gears yet again. Assemblyman Howard Watts was going to join us in person tonight, but there's a special session of the Nevada legislature going on. So he's now in Carson City and probably in a meeting, but you're going to see a video of him here in just a minute. And Howard dedicated his career to fighting for policies that preserve the environment, protect consumers, increase access to the ballot box, ensure dignity for historically marginalized communities. He's a son of culinary union members and a graduate of UNLV. Howard won election to the Nevada Assembly in 2018, representing District 15. Howard, take it away.
Hi, I'm Assemblyman Howard Watts. I'm currently in Carson City for the special session. I'm sorry I couldn't join you live today. I wanted to speak to you briefly as one of the proud co-sponsors of Assembly Joint Resolution 2, which we passed in 2019, expressing our overwhelming opposition to the military expansion into the Desert National Wildlife Refuge. Now, of course, this plan has come before Congress. In the US Senate, they've released their version of the National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA, and it includes a 20-year expansion of the current military footprint. So there's no expansion at all, and that's a huge win for us. But in the House, they've already amended their version of the NDAA to give primary control of over 800,000 acres of the wildlife refuge to the US Air Force. That basically makes it a wildlife refuge in name only. They didn't consult our members of Congress on this, and our delegation is pledged to fight it tooth and nail, but we need your help. Honestly, this fight is going to go all the way through till December, till the end of this Congress, and we need everybody lifting up their voice and calling to protect this special refuge, this special place, the largest refuge in the lower 48 states. So please join me in reaching out to your members of Congress and encouraging them to support no expansion in the Desert National Wildlife Refuge in the NDAA. Thanks.
And thank Howard for that. It's too bad he couldn't join us in person, but he does care passionately about this. And we are grateful to have him being such a great spokesman for the Desert Refuge. And so Howard has asked for help. And that leads right into our final speaker, who is Christian Gerlach. Christian was also born and raised in Las Vegas. He's a community organizing representative for the Siera Club and has been doing that for a number of years. Christian has a strong connection with the deserts of the Southwest, and he works to help elevate the voices of frontline communities. So welcome, Christian. What else is it? What is it that our listeners can do right now to protect the refuge?
Well, Shaaron, thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you, everybody, for being here with us today. We really need to make a lot of noise. We really have to raise our voices. Howard was right. We need to start calling our congressional representatives, start asking them to speak up very strongly, even calling other congressional representatives, House leadership. We need to make as much noise as possible. We've been very fortunate enough to work closely with the Mwapa Band of Paiute, who have passed governing council resolutions against this expansion. The Las Vegas Band of Paiute have used their voice and spoken up. Chemehuevi has spoken up, other indigenous peoples. And it's time that we help elevate those voices, that we help elevate this whole plight. So we need everybody that's watching here to use their social media platforms, speak up about it, share Siera Club posts, Friends of Nevada Wilderness, all the other organizations that are making noise about this, sign the petitions. There's blogs that are coming out, help share those out, get the information out there, make as much noise as possible. And again, even writing letters to the editor, every little bit of effort and raising our voices helps quite a bit. I've been blessed to go out there to the Wildlife Refuge several times, and it's a place that needs to be protected. There are cultural sites on par with any other World Heritage site, and it needs to be protected. Those places need to be afforded access to the indigenous peoples and not be taken away by the Air Force.
Great, thank you. Christian, I know you're a passionate supporter and you do so much, you and the Siera Club, with your voices, so thank you. I appreciate that. I'm going to ask right now that all of the panelists kind of jump back in. We can do a quick Q&A session here as time allows. And if there are specific questions for any of the panelists, please just let us know. I think we can have you put them in chat, and some people probably have done that. So let's see what's out there for questions that we can maybe follow up on. Let's see, there may be, oh, let me. I'm looking to see.
Shaaron, do you want me to go ahead and answer? I already answered one by typing
Did
back.
you? Sure. Do you
want
want to just go ahead with that? Absolutely, because other people may be really interested in that.
Sure. So Robert had asked who was pushing for the expansion, the president, military officials, or the Nevada senators or representatives. So the entire Nevada delegation, there's 2 Democratic senators, 3 Democratic representatives, and 1 Republican representative. All 6 of them endorsed that proposal that I talked about, number 3, the one where the demarcation line was at the Alamo Road with all the wilderness expansion. The 6 of them endorsed that. The people who are, so they are not for the expansion at all. The people that are really pushing for the expansion, the loudest voice is definitely the Air Force. The Trump administration supported the Air Force proposal. The proposal they sent over to Congress was almost exactly what the LEIS, the Legislative Environmental Impact Statement, had said. And then Rob Bishop, who is a congressman from Utah, who's actually retiring this year, he is the one who introduced the amendment that included the expansion. There was another question about it was a mistake. What we think happened in the committee was that the Nevada delegation was not consulted about this language, and the staff and the members on the House Armed Services Committee thought that it was going to be a good thing that there was no expansion, that they thought that the co-management was of the small little fingers of area that is under primary Air Force jurisdiction. So they thought that the areas that were primary Air Force were going to be co-managed by the Fish and Wildlife Service and the Air Force. So that's why we're saying it's a mistake, and that's why we're pushing so hard to get this fixed, because we don't think that this is what they intended to do. Hope that helps.
And a quick follow-up too, it just seems like in the last couple of days, there's been a ton of media about this, particularly in Nevada. The delegation has come out very, very strongly opposing this amendment. They feel like they were betrayed. They are angry and they want it fixed. Today, Governor Sisolak, our Nevada governor, came out with a very strong letter supporting the delegation, as well. As Howard mentioned, the Nevada State Legislature, bipartisan, almost unanimous, opposed any kind of an expansion or primary jurisdiction for the Air Force. So I would say that there probably haven't been very many issues that have united the elected officials in Nevada like this one has, maybe the Yucca Mountain nuclear dump site. But this is sort of reminiscent for a lot of people, another Screw Nevada bill. And so, Nevada is in a strong place. We really need help across the country to make sure that other members of Congress understand that these lands of the Desert Refuge belong to everybody. This is a national treasure. It's part of the refuge system. So we need to fight for this. Let's see, there was a question about, I wonder if there are estimates of plant and animal species on the endangered species list that would face extinction from the expansion of the military proposal into the refuge, or at least be impacted. Curt, you want to take that one?
Sure.
Or somebody else.
Yeah, and I'll also allow Russell or some of the other wildlife folks to give their thoughts as well. It's an interesting one. I mean, I would first say that any chance of a major extinction or something just devastating like that only increases with a change in jurisdiction and with the type of activities that we've talked about here today. There are several T&E species in the project area, and it's been a little bit since I've looked at the like the ICUN or the kind of the red list, but there are some that are really tending towards the critically endangered portion of that list. But more of those are probably the aquatic species, the poolfish, the dace, things like that. But it would be an interesting, a really interesting analysis to dig in. But yeah, I'm interested in hearing what others have to say as well.
Anybody else? Anything to add on to that? We can, if not, we can move on. Garett, this one might be yours. Are there ways that we can help the Air Force work on these kinds of projects in other ways, i.e. virtual programs instead of physically damaging the land? We hear sometimes about, you know, can some of this training or more of this training be done virtually?
It's my opinion, they don't need any additional land or any additional means of training. I mean, they have 2.9 million acres with the existing training range. You know, I think that's adequate for all the purposes they've already require. I mean, the area within the current training range is destroyed. It'll never be public lands or accessible for recreation or wildlife ever again. So they've already ruined this land. They might as well continue to use it. You know, can we help them? Certainly we could, you know, if you have the skills and the resources, you know, to get a contract to help the U.S. military with the training, I'm sure they'd appreciate that. But I just don't think they need any additional land, you know, and this is being pushed now by Rob Bishop, who's been, you know, his legacy is attacking public lands everywhere. He's destroyed Bears Ears in his own state of Utah, and he's not content to stay within his own state. He goes into every other state and tries to meddle and destroy our public lands and our wildlife habitat everywhere. So, you know, I don't think this is necessarily just about the military and what the military needs. This is about taking away, I think, our public rights for land and making it secluded to either corporations or the military.
Thank you. Another question, what is the likelihood of reversing this amendment given what the administration has done, as you just said, to Bears Ears and Grand Staircase, Escalante National Monuments? Curt, do you want to take that one?
I'll say really quick, and then maybe Caroline too. I mean, I will say that I'm an eternal optimist in a lot of ways, so I don't want to overstate anything, but we're seeing an incredible response from the people right now, an incredible amount of people contacting their representatives, both in Nevada and across the country. We know that the leadership, that Pelosi, that the chairman of these committees are hearing people. You know, we're doing what we can, and but we have to keep up the work in order to keep going forward, because these are big bills. There's a lot of stuff going on, as everyone knows, across the country. So, you know, it may come down to how much of a priority can we make this nationally, which is really going to take continued outreach.
Yeah, so I'll just add on to that. So the House can strike that amendment in the Rules Committee before it goes to the floor. They can do that. They have the ability to do that. If they want to and they hear from enough people, they can. What we need to do and what our job is, everybody who's listening to this, we have to make as much noise as possible, because if they don't hear any opposition to what's happened at Desert, they won't do anything. There's no political reason for them to do it. But if they hear enough outrage, then they have the ability and the power to do it, because what passed in the Senate is status quo. That's the good proposal that we want. The House has the ability to do status quo, and they can do it. They just have to have the political will to do that. And that's where we all come in.
That's right. We have to give them the political will to do that. Make it harder for them to not keep it the way it is. And so we'll encourage them. There was a question about the timeline for this campaign. How long do we have? Not long on this, like weeks, week and a half, 2 weeks?
Like maybe 2 weeks.
the House comes back into session, I think the week of the 20th. And this really, what everybody is working on right now is to keep this from going to the House floor. We want to get that amendment out before the House has to vote on it in its entirety. So we don't have a lot of time. So now is the time to be calling and making noise. The ultimate decision on what's going to happen probably won't happen until it goes through a joint committee, and it could be after the election by the time that the final vote is made on the National Defense Authorization Act. But for right now, our immediate crisis is short-term, a couple weeks. This is an interesting one, and I don't know if anybody's got the answer to it, but Fawn, maybe. Is today's Supreme Court ruling for Native tribes in Oklahoma of any relevance to how the Paiute tribe can fight for the refuge expansion or the refuge, protecting the refuge? And since this just happened, I'm not sure how well versed folks are. Fawn, do you know anything about that?
Well, I heard a little something about Oklahoma being parts of it being returned to the tribes, but I have not read up on it. I've been busy with other things today, but I definitely look forward to reading that. I know that tribes' sovereignty should be respected. I know that the Las Vegas Paiute tribe and the Mwapa Band of Paiutes drafted those resolutions, which I listed back in 2018, 2019 to get these things going. And I feel like the tribes have been ignored. Their voices have been ignored. And that's why I read the Las Vegas Paiute tribe statement again today, because I really think that it holds a lot of weight, and we really need to listen to what these tribal governments have to say and respect their words. These are our elected officials. These are the voices of our tribal councils. And I really think that people need to start respecting that, because we have a lot to share. We have a lot to give. We have a lot of stories that are within these areas specifically. Our histories are there. Our rock writings are there. I don't need to go on into repeating everything, but there's so much about this place that is our ancestral homelands, but it is also all of yours. All of the people that are watching today, all the people that are standing beside us, these are places that we share together. These are places that we need to respect together. And I think that if we had an understanding of these stories, of these histories, that we could all, cohabitate in these places and, really support. But it's going to take an education, and it's going to take some understanding, because there are a lot of people that don't even know what the Desert National Wildlife Refuge is. And until recent, since Standing Rock, people didn't even know that there was even a tribe, or that Native people were still alive to this day.
Thanks for that. Really appreciate it. We had a question: does Bishop's amendment apply only to the 150,000 acres and not to the additional acres to the east of the Alamo Road? Yes, it is only that in that shared jurisdiction to the west side of the refuge that the Bishop Amendment applies. There was no expansion in the Bishop Amendment, just in essence giving away the western half of the refuge to the military. Let's see. Here's do you think they are being honest with the reasons they are using this, the military? If they do not need this land, where's the transparency with us?
I guess I could take that one. Yeah, I mean, there's certainly probably some ulterior motives to using the land. A lot of, folks are believe that there might be some wargaming aspects to the area to simulate conventional wars on static sites where there's anti-air defense, anti-air radar, things like that, where they need additional range to take out those targets. So there might include, multi-use forces, which means not just Air Force utilizing the grounds. We've seen special operations in areas of the Paiute Shoshone around Fallon, where Navy SEALs have used the land and desecrated areas where they probably shouldn't be. And there could be similar activities in and around the Air Force training range, you know, that could be increasingly damaging. But the deal is, once the military has jurisdiction, they can pretty much do whatever they want, and they will push that boundaries for whatever they need. And when it comes to land management and the Department of Defense, it is as the mission requires. And if they determine that the mission requires destroying that land completely for training purposes, they will.
All right, I know we're getting pretty limited on time here. There's a question, who is on the Rules Committee?
Can we take that?
Sure.
A volunteer. So there's a number of people on the Rules Committee. The chairman of the Rules Committee is Jim McGovern from Massachusetts. He's the Democrat in charge of the committee. And then Tom Cole is from Oklahoma. He's the Republican ranking member. And what's interesting about Tom Cole is we had talked a few minutes ago, or Fawn had talked about that Oklahoma ruling in the Supreme Court, and Tom Cole was supportive of the tribe's claim in that he was siding with the tribes on that side. So in that case, I mean, so I think that, you know, if people can get some calls into McGovern and into Cole, that would be great. You can just Google, there's, I'm totally blanking on the main number for the House, but if you can call the House switchboard and talk and ask for McGovern or for Tom Cole's office, or you can actually, that would probably be the best route, because if you're not a constituent of either of them, it's hard to get in contact with them. So a phone call would be best into their office and ask them to, you know, strike this amendment.
There was a question about can we share the contact information for the members of the House Armed Services Committee? Go ahead, Carol.
So if you Google House Rules Committee, it will pop up all the names of everybody. It probably will be the first Google link that pops up, and click on there and you'll be able to find it. It should have their contact information on there. I haven't looked at the website recently, but you can look there.
So that would be the same for any committee. So for the Armed Services Committee, for the Natural Resource Committee, just Google that to pull those up. Okay, great. Let's see, we're almost done with the questions here, I think. There was a hearing for the Owyhee tribe when the Air Force tried to take land away from them for a bombing range back in the 90s. So this is not a new thing. This is happening in many places. Do we have, are we out of time? Let me see where we are. Yeah, we're kind of after the hour. We probably should break this off right now. What is the next step for getting information out to folks? Will each of these organizations be continuing to put out alerts and providing information? You know, we have information on our website as well, www.wildnevada.org, nevadawilderness.org, both of those work. But I'm sure all of these other groups have great information as well, where we can continue to add information so folks can keep up to date with what's going on. Other panel members want to talk about where their members and others can go for good information.
Yeah, this is Russell. We're in the process of overhauling our website, but all of our social media is up to date and current, and we post a lot of about this issue there. So whether that's Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, if you just searched Nevada Wildlife Federation on any of those platforms, you'll find us, and that's where we're posting all of our relevant or take action pages are on those platforms.
Great, and Carolyn just posted the switchboard number. So 202-224-3121 is the main House switchboard that you can reach any member with that number. So it's in the chat if you want to pull that off. And let's see. Is there anything else? Oh, somebody asked if this is being recorded. Yes, it is being recorded, and we can make that available too. So with that, I wish we could go on, but let's call it a night tonight. Thank you all for the listeners who came and participated in this, for the panelists who were a part of this, and for all the organizations and people out there who care about the refuge and are making a lot of noise. So keep it up, guys. Thank you so much, and really appreciate you all coming tonight.